You've probably noticed it too, how avoidants always seem to come back after the relationship ends. They leave in silence, vanish without a proper goodbye, but somehow they always return. And when they do, you're left in a storm of confusion. Should you let them in again, or protect yourself this time? The hardest part is, when someone leaves you with deep emotional and spiritual wounds, you're not in the right state of mind to make clear decisions. Even if your mind knows better, your heart is still soft, still loyal. You loved them more than you loved yourself. You gave them everything. So yes, the desire to give them another chance is real and understandable. But before you open the door again, pause. Look closely at what they've been doing. Some patterns don't change. Some people are prisoners of their own nature, like a snake that keeps biting no matter how much milk you feed it. No matter how much time passes, certain behaviors reveal more truth than words ever could. So instead of letting them experiment on your heart again, take a moment to observe. Pay attention to their actions, not just their return. Before you offer peace to someone who once broke it, make sure you're not sacrificing yourself again. Let's talk about the patterns and behaviors that reveal who the avoidant really is, so you can make a decision rooted in truth, not loneliness. They always make you feel like the guilty one, even when they were at fault. An avoidant person has a pattern. They shift the blame onto you, making you feel guilty for things they themselves did. They can't sit with their own shame, so they hand it to you. Think about those moments when you went quiet. Not because everything was okay, but because something inside you broke. Maybe they raised their voice, dismissed your feelings, blamed you for reacting, and when you finally said nothing, even your silence became too much for them. Suddenly, you became the problem. You don't love me. You always make things difficult. Words that make you question yourself. And slowly, you start to apologize for things you didn't even do. You sit there wondering, did I push too far? Maybe I shouldn't have said anything. They twist reality so convincingly that you begin to feel ashamed for simply needing respect. They rarely take responsibility for how they treat you, but they expect you to carry the weight of the entire relationship. They cross the line again and again, and yet you're the one always saying sorry. It's emotional manipulation in the most subtle form. Like a child who never learned emotional maturity, they deflect, project, and escape accountability. And as long as you silently carry their burden, they feel no need to change. Because in their eyes, the problem isn't their behavior, it's your reaction. But a healthy person, they're different. They stop and listen. They don't take your silence as rejection, they hear it as a cry for connection. They don't mock your pain or deny your emotions. If they hurt you, they apologize, not because they want to avoid conflict, but because they genuinely care. A real connection is built on this: mutual respect, emotional safety, and the ability to hold space for one another's truth. They avoid talking about the past, as if resolving it isn't their responsibility. An avoidant person often treats the past like a closed door, one that must never be opened, no matter how much damage still lingers behind it. The moment you try to talk about something that hurt you, something that never got resolved, they become defensive, distant, or completely shut down. You can feel it in the air, their discomfort, their urge to change the subject, their subtle way of making you feel like the problem for even bringing it up. They'll say things like, "Why are you still holding on to that?" Or "Can't we just move on?" As if emotional healing is an inconvenience, as if your pain is something you should simply get over, quietly and alone. They don't want to revisit what went wrong, because deep down, they fear accountability. Not necessarily out of malice, but because owning their part would mean facing their emotional limitations, and that's something they've spent years avoiding. So instead, they build walls. They give you surface-level interactions when what you really need is emotional depth. And the most painful part? You're left carrying the weight of conversations that never happened, questions that never got answered, emotions that never got validated. You try again. Maybe you soften your tone. Maybe you wait for the right moment. But every time you reach for closeness through truth, they respond with coldness or avoidance. And eventually you start questioning yourself. Maybe I'm being too emotional, you think. Maybe it's better not to bring it up. But deep down, you know the silence is costing you. You feel alone, even in their presence. A healthy person is different. They may not always have the perfect response, but they stay. They don't run from hard conversations, because they value clarity over comfort. They listen, not to defend themselves, but to understand you. They're willing to revisit the past, if it helps you both move forward. Because to them, emotional connection is worth the discomfort it takes to build. And in that kind of space, your voice isn't a threat, it's welcome. Healing becomes possible, because you're not fighting to be heard anymore. You're finally being met. They can't really listen. Your emotions make them irritated or distant. Have you ever noticed how uncomfortable they get the moment you try to open up? It doesn't even have to be dramatic. Maybe you just wanted to talk about how something they said hurt you, or how you've been feeling a little low lately. But instead of getting closer, they pull away, their body stiffens, their eyes shift, and suddenly it feels like your emotions are a burden they don't want to carry. What should have been a moment of connection now feels like rejection. With an avoidant person, vulnerability makes them restless. Not because you're too much, but because emotional closeness feels unsafe to them. Somewhere along the way, they learned that emotions lead to disappointment, chaos, or being trapped. So instead of leaning in when you speak your truth, they shut down. They minimize what you feel. It's not a big deal. Why are you overthinking? Just move on already. These phrases don't come from cruelty, they come from fear. But here's the problem. When someone can't sit with your feelings, it makes you question if your feelings are even valid. You start shrinking. You choose silence over truth. You stop asking for what you need, because every time you try, it ends with them getting annoyed, walking away, or changing the subject. And then one day you realize you've built an entire relationship around avoiding your own voice. This dynamic is more damaging than we realize. When someone consistently responds to your emotions with distance, it creates deep emotional loneliness. You may be physically with them, but your heart feels completely alone, and that's a very quiet kind of pain. One that wears down your self-worth slowly, day by day. A healthy partner doesn't panic when you're emotional. They don't roll their eyes or leave the room when you need to talk. They may not always have the answers, but they stay. They listen, even when it's hard. Because they understand that love isn't just about laughter and light moments. It's also about holding space for the messy ones. You deserve that kind of presence, not someone who disappears every time you get real. Their words are never consistent. The story changes every time. Have you ever found yourself second-guessing your own memory? Not because you're forgetful, but because every time you bring up something that happened, the story somehow changes. One day they said one thing. The next day it's something completely different. And when you try to clarify it, you're met with defensiveness, sarcasm, or worse, denial. They'll say, "That's not what I meant," or "You misunderstood me." Even when you remember the words clearly, slowly, you stop trusting your own mind. This is one of the most subtle and confusing parts of being around someone emotionally avoidant or manipulative. The inconsistency in their words. It's not just about lying, it's about rewriting reality in real time. And because you're emotionally invested in them, you try to keep up. You try to make sense of the contradictions. But the more you try, the more lost you feel. You start asking yourself, did I really hear that? Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I just imagined it. And that's the trap. The inconsistency in their communication isn't just frustrating, it's destabilizing. It makes you feel like the ground beneath your feet is constantly shifting. You don't know what's real anymore. You begin to question your instincts, your emotional responses, and even your basic sense of logic. That kind of self-doubt doesn't come from nowhere. It's created. Here's the thing. Healthy relationships don't make you feel like you're losing your grip on reality. In a safe dynamic, even when people disagree, they don't twist facts. They don't rewrite history to protect their ego. They take accountability. They remember what they said, and if they've changed their mind, they explain why. There's a thread of consistency in their words, even when emotions are involved. But with someone avoidant or emotionally unavailable, clarity feels impossible. One moment they say you mean everything to them. The next they act like you're asking for too much. One day they're open and affectionate. The next they're cold and distant, and you're left doing emotional math that never quite adds up. That confusion isn't your fault. It's the result of trying to find emotional stability in someone who hasn't found it within themselves. You deserve words you can rely on, not ones that shift like sand every time you reach for solid ground. Sometimes, the truth is, we don't really want to leave them either. We see everything, the change in their tone, the sarcasm hidden in their words, the coldness in their silence, and the indifference that quietly wounds us. And still, we stay. Maybe because we feel like we have no other option, or maybe because our heart is still tied to the hope of a miracle. Sometimes we fear being alone. Sometimes we worry we might be the one who's wrong. And sometimes we stay just because our heart still believes that person is home. But sometimes, to save yourself, you have to harden your heart. Walking away from certain relationships is not weakness. It's honoring a promise you once made to yourself. It's protecting your peace, your self-respect. your life. We have to remember we only get one life, and if we spend it chasing someone's attention, waiting for them to change, or living for a love that only breaks us, then when do we live for ourselves? When do we feel our own joy, our own dreams, our own peace? Never forget, your life is your responsibility. I truly hope this video reached your heart in some way, and if it did, please like it, subscribe, and share it with someone who might be silently struggling and feeling alone right now.